The sun was setting over the small town of Willow Creek, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional chirping of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. It was just another, ordinary day, or so it seemed. Ethan, a curious 10-year-old boy with messy hair and a knack for finding adventure where others saw none, was walking home from playing with his friends. He lived in a modest house at the edge of town, surrounded by tall trees that swayed gently in the wind. As he turned onto the narrow path leading to his porch, something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was a stray cat, or maybe a bundle, of clothes someone had left behind. But as he stepped closer, his heart skipped a beat. There, nestled against the wooden railing of the porch, was a baby. A real, live baby, wrapped snugly in a thin, faded blanket. The child couldn't have been more than 6 months old, with wide, innocent eyes that stared up at Ethan like he was the most important person in the world. His tiny hands waved aimlessly as if reaching out for help. Ethan froze, unsure of what to do. His mind raced with questions. Who would leave a baby here? Why on their porch? Wasn't anyone looking for him? The baby didn't cry. Instead, he looked calm, almost trusting, as if he knew Ethan wouldn't hurt him. Slowly, Ethan knelt down and reached out a hand. The baby grabbed his finger tightly, and in that moment, Ethan felt something stir inside him, a mix of fear, wonder, and an overwhelming urge to protect this little stranger. "Hey there," Ethan whispered softly, trying to sound reassuring even though his voice shook slightly. "Where did you come from?" He glanced around, hoping to spot someone nearby who might explain why the baby was here, but the street was empty. No cars passed by, no neighbors lingered outside chatting. Just silence. Taking a deep breath, Ethan carefully picked up the baby, making sure to support his head. The infant smelled faintly of powder and warmth, and despite everything, Ethan couldn't help but smile. For such a small creature, he carried a big presence. With the baby cradled in his arms, Ethan pushed open the front door of his house. Inside, the air smelled of yesterday's dinner, spaghetti and garlic bread, and the faint hum of the television played in the background. His mother, Laura, sat on the couch flipping through channels, her face illuminated by the flickering screen. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped after another long day at work. "Mom," Ethan called out, his voice tinged with excitement and urgency. "You gotta see this." Laura turned her head, raising an eyebrow at the sight of her son holding something. "What is that?" she asked, squinting. "It's a baby," Ethan replied, stepping closer. "I found him on the porch. Someone left him there." For a moment, Laura simply stared, her expression unreadable. Then, without warning, her brow furrowed and she stood up abruptly. "What do you mean, a baby?" "Ethan, we don't take babies like him," she said sharply, her tone leaving no room for argument. Ethan blinked, confused. "Like him? What does that even mean?" Laura sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Look, I don't know who left him there or why, but this isn't our problem. We can't just keep random kids who show up on our doorstep." "But Mom, he's alone," Ethan protested, clutching the baby closer. "What if nobody comes back for him? What if he gets hurt?" "That's not our responsibility," Laura snapped, her patience wearing thin. "Call the police or social services or whoever deals with these things. This isn't something we can handle." Her words stung, cutting deeper than Ethan expected. He had always known his mom could be strict, but this felt different. Her refusal wasn't just about practicality. It felt cold, almost cruel. How could she turn away a helpless baby who needed care? That night, as Ethan lay awake in bed, the baby sleeping peacefully beside him on a pile of blankets, he made a decision. He didn't understand all the grown-up reasons his mom gave for not wanting to help, but one thing was clear. He couldn't let the baby go. Not yet. Not until he was sure the little one would be safe. And so, under the cover of darkness, Ethan began planning. He didn't know how long he could keep the baby hidden or what would happen if his mom found out. All he knew was that he couldn't give up, not when those big, trusting eyes depended on him. Ethan's new reality became a balancing act between secrecy and survival. Every morning he woke up before the sun rose, careful not to make a sound as he slipped out of bed. The baby, he had started calling him Noah, was surprisingly quiet for such a little one, almost like he understood the need to stay hidden. Ethan would check on him first thing, making sure he was still warm and comfortable. Then, he'd tiptoe to the kitchen, grabbing whatever scraps he could find without raising suspicion. Breakfast was usually toast or cereal, but now Ethan saved half his portions for Noah. He'd mash bananas or apples into tiny bits, figuring it was better than nothing. Sometimes when his mom wasn't looking, he'd sneak a bottle of milk from the fridge, wrapping it in a towel so it wouldn't clink against anything while he carried it back to his room. It wasn't much, but it kept Noah fed and alive. Tucker, hardest part wasn't feeding him, though. It was keeping him entertained. Babies weren't exactly known for their patience, and Noah was no exception. There were moments when Ethan thought his heart might stop because of a sudden gurgle or coo that seemed too loud. Each noise felt like a siren in the quiet house, alerting his mom to their secret. To keep Noah happy, Ethan used an old dollhouse blanket as a makeshift playmat and lined up his toys in a row. Noah loved chewing on the edges of plastic blocks, giggling every time Ethan made funny faces or silly sounds. Those giggles were both a blessing and a curse. They reminded Ethan why he was doing this, but also terrified him of being caught. School? Ethan struggled to focus. His mind kept drifting back to Noah, wondering if he was okay, if he needed changing, or if he was hungry again. During recess, instead of joining his friends on the playground, Ethan often sat alone under the big oak tree staring off into the distance. His best friend Tommy noticed something was wrong after a few days. "Hey, you've been acting weird lately," Tommy said one afternoon, nudging Ethan with his elbow. "What's going on?" Ethan hesitated, torn between wanting to confide in someone and knowing he couldn't risk it. "Nothing," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. "Just tired, I guess." Tommy frowned but didn't push further. Ethan wished he could tell him everything, that he had found a baby on his porch, that his mom refused to help, that he was hiding Noah in his room, but the words stayed stuck in his throat. This was his responsibility, and his alone. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan grew more resourceful. He learned to listen for the creaks in the floorboards, timing his movements to avoid drawing attention. At night, when his mom was asleep, he'd sneak outside to scavenge for supplies. Empty bottles from neighbors' recycling bins became treasures, and old blankets from the thrift store down the street were repurposed for Noah's comfort. Once, he even managed to swipe a pacifier from a display at the grocery store, slipping it into his pocket when no one was watching. Guilt gnawed at him for stealing, but he told himself it was worth it, if it meant keeping Noah safe. Despite his efforts, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. His mom hadn't confronted him about the missing food or supplies yet, but she was starting to notice things. One evening, as Ethan hurried past her in the hallway, she stopped him with a sharp look. "You've been acting strange lately," she said, crossing her arms. "Is there something you're not telling me?" Ethan's stomach dropped, but he forced himself to meet her gaze. "Nope, everything's fine." Laura studied him for a moment longer before shaking her head. "All right, but if I find out you're lying." She let the threat hang in the air, unspoken but clear. That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He hated lying to his mom, hated the tension building between them. But what choice did he have? If he told her the truth, she'd take Noah away and he'd never see him again. And worse, who knew where Noah would end up? Would anyone else care for him the way Ethan did? One chilly evening, disaster struck. Ethan had ventured farther than usual during one of his supply runs, hoping to find a sturdier blanket for Noah. As he rummaged through a neighbor's recycling bin, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning quickly, he came face to face with Mrs. Peterson, the elderly woman who lived next door. Her eyes widened in surprise as she took in the sight of Ethan holding a bag filled with bottles and other odd items. "Well, well," she said. her voice tinged with curiosity. "What are you doing out here, young man?" Ethan froze, his mind scrambling for an excuse. Just, helping my mom clean out some stuff," he stammered, clutching the bag tighter. Mrs. Peterson raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. "All right then, don't stay out too late. It's getting cold." After she left, Ethan bolted back home, his heart pounding. He tried to convince himself that she wouldn't think twice about it, but deep down, he knew better. Small towns like Willow Creek thrived on gossip, and it wouldn't take long for word to spread about the boy seen sneaking around late at night with mysterious bags. Sure enough, by the next morning, rumors were already swirling. Ethan overheard snippets of conversations at school, whispers about how Laura must be losing control of her son, jokes about Ethan bringing home strays again after the incident with the dog. By lunchtime, the story had morphed into something entirely different, with some kids claiming Ethan was hiding a wild animal in his room. But the worst part came later that afternoon, when Sheriff Daniels pulled up to their house in his patrol car. Ethan watched from his bedroom window as his mom greeted the sheriff on the porch, her body stiff with unease. They talked for a few minutes before Daniels stepped inside, asking to speak with Ethan privately, sitting across from the sheriff. In the living room, Ethan felt his palms grow sweaty. Daniels was a kind man with a gruff voice and a reassuring smile, but Ethan couldn't bring himself to trust him completely. "So, Ethan," the sheriff began, leaning forward slightly, "I hear you've been up to something unusual lately. Care to explain?" Ethan swallowed hard, his mind racing. "I don't know what you mean," he lied, forcing his voice to stay steady. Daniel studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but if you remember anything, or if you need help, you know where to find me." When the sheriff finally left, Ethan exhaled a shaky breath. For now, they were safe. But he knew it was only a matter of time before someone figured out the truth. And when that happened, he wasn't sure how far he'd have to go to protect Noah, or if he'd be able to protect him at all. The next morning, the whole town seemed to buzz with excitement, or rather suspicion. Ethan could feel it in the air as he walked to school, his backpack slung over one shoulder. People who usually ignored him now nodded or whispered behind, cupped hands when he passed by. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman who ran the corner store, gave him a long, curious look as he bought a candy bar, her lips pressed into a thin line. Even Tommy, his best friend, kept glancing at him during class, like he was waiting for Ethan to suddenly sprout wings and fly away. At home, things weren't any better. Laura had been unusually quiet since Sheriff Daniels's visit, but Ethan knew that silence wasn't a good sign. She moved around the house with tight, deliberate steps, her jaw clenched as if she were trying to solve a puzzle she didn't want to admit existed. Every time Ethan entered a room, he felt her eyes on him, sharp and searching, like she was trying to peel back the layers of his lies without saying a word. Finally, late that evening, after dinner, dishes were cleared and the house settled into its usual quiet hum. Laura cornered Ethan in the hallway. Her arms were crossed and her face was unreadable, part frustration, part something else Ethan couldn't quite place. "All right," she said, her voice low but firm. "What's really going on? Don't lie to me this time." Ethan's heart sank. He'd known this moment was coming, but he hadn't expected it to hit so soon, or so directly. For a second, he considered doubling down on his story, making up another excuse about stray animals or school projects gone wrong. But then he looked into his mom's eyes and something inside him cracked. Maybe it was the exhaustion in her voice or the way her shoulders sagged slightly, like she already carried too much weight. Whatever it was, Ethan realized he couldn't keep running from the truth, not anymore. Taking a deep breath, he blurted it out. "I found a baby on our porch weeks ago. I've been hiding him in my room because I didn't think you'd help him." For a moment, Laura just stared at him, her mouth slightly open as if she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Then slowly, her expression shifted from shock to anger, and beneath that, a flicker of hurt. "You did what?" she hissed, her voice rising despite her effort to stay calm. "Ethan, do you have any idea how dangerous that is? What were you thinking?" "I was thinking that he needed someone." Ethan shot back, surprising even himself with the fierceness in his tone. "He was alone, Mom. No note, no nothing, just left there. And you said we don't take babies like him." His voice cracked on the last part, and he looked down, unable to meet her gaze. Laura sighed heavily, rubbing her temples like she was warding off a headache. "That's not what I meant, and you know it. This isn't about who he is or where he came from. It's about responsibility, Ethan. We can't just keep random kids who show up on our doorstep. There are rules, systems in place for situations like this." "But what if those systems don't work?" Ethan countered, his voice trembling. "What if nobody wants him? What if he ends up somewhere worse than here?" Laura opened her mouth to respond but stopped short, her expression softening just a fraction. She glanced toward Ethan's closed bedroom door, as if suddenly remembering the tiny life hidden behind it. After a pause, she shook her head. "This has gone on long enough. Tomorrow morning we're calling social services. They'll figure out what to do with him." "No," Ethan shouted, louder than he intended. "You can't. Please, Mom, just give me a little more time. Let me prove I can take care of him." "It's not your job to take care of him," Laura snapped, her patience finally snapping. "You're 10 years old, Ethan. You're supposed to be playing outside, riding your bike, doing normal kid stuff, not raising a baby." Her words stung, but Ethan refused to back down. "Maybe I'm not normal," he muttered under his breath, crossing his arms defiantly. "But neither is leaving a baby on someone's porch. At least I tried to help." Laura looked like she wanted to argue further, but instead, she turned and walked away, muttering something about needing fresh air. Ethan stood there for a while, his chest tight with a mix of guilt and determination. He hated fighting with his mom, but he couldn't let her win this battle. Not when Noah depended on him. That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Noah slept soundly beside him, his breathing soft and rhythmic. The baby had become such a constant presence in Ethan's life that it was hard to imagine letting him go. Every giggle, every sleepy sigh felt like a thread tying them together, binding Ethan to a purpose bigger than himself. But now, that bond was being threatened, and he wasn't ready to let it break. As the hours ticked by, Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. If he couldn't change his mom's mind, maybe he could find another way to protect Noah. Running away wasn't something he'd ever considered before. It sounded scary, reckless even. But desperation had a way of pushing people to do things they never thought they'd do. By the time dawn broke, Ethan had made up his mind. Before his mom woke up, he packed a small bag with essentials, a change of clothes for both him and Noah, a few bottles of formula he'd managed to scrounge up, and some snacks. He hesitated, for a moment looking around his room one last time. This was the only home he'd ever known, and leaving it felt like stepping into the unknown. But staying meant risking losing Noah forever, and that was a risk Ethan wasn't willing to take. With Noah bundled securely in his arms, Ethan slipped out through his bedroom window, careful not to make a sound. The early morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew-covered grass. Behind their house stretched a dense patch of woods, a place where Ethan often played as a child. It was wild and untamed, full of secrets and shadows, but right now it felt like the safest option. As he stepped into the trees, leaving the familiar world behind, Ethan whispered softly to Noah, "Don't worry, buddy. We'll be okay. I promise." And with that, they disappeared into the forest, two unlikely companions bound by trust and survival, facing whatever challenges lay ahead together. The woods behind Ethan's house were both beautiful and intimidating, a maze of towering trees, tangled roots, and dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy above. To most people, it was just a patch of wilderness at the edge of town. Somewhere, kids dared each other to explore after dark. But for Ethan, it had always been a place of refuge, a secret world where he could escape the noise and rules of everyday life. Now, as he trudged deeper into the forest with Noah cradled in his arms, it felt less like an adventure and more like survival. Every step was deliberate, every sound magnified. The crunch of leaves underfoot seemed impossibly loud, and the occasional rustle of branches made Ethan's heart race. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see his mom or Sheriff Daniels emerge from the shadows calling his name. But no one followed. For now, they were alone. Ethan found a small clearing surrounded by thick bushes, a spot hidden enough to offer some protection but open enough to let in light. Using fallen branches and broad leaves, he fashioned a makeshift shelter, layering them carefully to shield against the chill that crept in as the sun dipped lower in the sky. It wasn't much, but it would have to do, for tonight at least. Settling down with Noah, Ethan pulled out the snacks he'd packed. A few granola bars, a banana, and a couple of juice boxes. He broke pieces of the banana into tiny bits, feeding them gently to Noah, who gurgled happily at the taste. Watching the baby smile, even in such uncertain circumstances, gave Ethan a flicker of hope. Maybe they really could make this work, if only for a little while. But reality quickly set in. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and the forest came alive with unfamiliar sounds. Crickets chirped incessantly, owls hooted in the distance, and the occasional snap of a twig echoed through the trees. Each noise sent a jolt of fear through Ethan, making him clutch Noah closer. What if there were animals lurking nearby? What if someone or something found them? Sleep didn't come easily. Ethan stayed awake long after Noah drifted off, his mind racing with questions and worries. How long could they survive out here? Where would they go next? And most importantly, how would his mom react when she realized they were gone? Part of him hoped she'd be worried, maybe even regretful about her decision to turn Noah over to social services. Another part feared she might not care at all. By morning, exhaustion weighed heavily on Ethan, but there was no time to rest. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and he knew Noah wouldn't last long without proper food. Gathering his courage, Ethan ventured back toward the edge of the woods, sticking to the outskirts where houses dotted the landscape. He scoured trash bins and recycling piles, scavenging anything useful, empty bottles, old blankets, scraps of bread. It was humiliating, rooting through garbage like an animal. But pride was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. On his second trip, disaster nearly struck. A neighbor spotted him rummaging through their bin and called out, asking what he was doing. Panicked, Ethan stammered an excuse about looking for a lost toy before bolting back into the trees. His heart pounded as he ran, terrified that the neighbor might call his mom, or worse, the sheriff. From then on, he moved more cautiously, avoiding areas where people might see him. Despite the constant danger, Ethan found moments of unexpected joy. Noah's laughter became a lifeline, a reminder of why he was doing this. One afternoon, as they sat together in the clearing, Ethan tickled Noah's belly, eliciting a burst of giggles that echoed through the woods. For a brief moment, everything else faded away, the fear, the hunger, the uncertainty, and it was just the two of them sharing a connection that felt almost magical. Back in Willow Creek, panic was growing. When Laura discovered Ethan and Noah missing, she immediately called Sheriff Daniels, her voice trembling with equal parts anger and concern. Search parties formed, combing the woods and surrounding areas. Flyers with Ethan's picture went up around town, urging anyone with information to come forward. Reporters arrived, eager to cover the story of the runaway boy and the mysterious baby he refused to abandon. At first, Ethan tried to ignore the commotion, focusing instead on keeping Noah safe. But as days passed, it became harder to stay hidden. Helicopters circled overhead, their blades chopping through the quiet of the forest. Voices carried through the trees, shouting his name. Each time Ethan held his breath, praying they wouldn't find them. One evening, as he huddled with Noah beneath the makeshift shelter, a new sound caught his attention. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps that stopped just short of the clearing. Ethan froze, his body tense, ready to run if needed. Then a voice cut through the darkness. "You shouldn't be out here." Ethan's eyes widened as a figure stepped into view. It was Mr. Grady, a reclusive man who lived deep in the woods. Most people in town avoided him, whispering stories about how he'd chosen solitude after losing his family years ago. Up close, though, Ethan saw kindness in his weathered face, a gentleness that put him at ease. "I'm not hurting anyone. Ethan said defensively, holding Noah tighter. Mr. Grady nodded slowly. I know, but you're not safe out here either. Not with everyone looking for you. For a moment, Ethan considered lying, denying who he was or why he was hiding. But something about Mr. Grady's calm demeanor made him want to trust him. Hesitantly, he told the truth, about finding Noah, about his mom's refusal to help, about running away to protect him. To Ethan's surprise, Mr. Grady didn't judge him. Instead, he offered a solution. Come stay with me, he said simply. Just until things settle down. I've got food, shelter, and no one will think to look for you there. Ethan hesitated, torn between gratitude and caution. Could he really trust this stranger? But as he looked down at Noah sleeping peacefully despite the chaos around them, he realized he didn't have a choice. They needed help, and Mr. Grady seemed willing to give it. Under the cover of darkness, Ethan and Noah followed Mr. Grady to his cabin, a modest structure tucked deep within the woods. Inside, it was warm and inviting, with shelves lined with books and jars of preserved food. For the first time in days, Ethan allowed himself to relax, knowing they were safe, at least for now. Over the next few days, Mr. Grady taught Ethan basic survival skills, how to build a fire, identify edible plants, and navigate the forest without getting lost. He also shared stories of his own past, opening up about the pain of losing loved ones and the importance of fighting for those who matter. Listening to him, Ethan began to feel less alone, like maybe he wasn't crazy for wanting to protect Noah. But even as hope flickered back to life, Ethan knew their time in the woods couldn't last forever. Sooner or later, they'd have to face the world outside and decide what kind of future they wanted to build together. Living with Mr. Grady was like stepping into a different world, a simpler, quieter one that existed far away from the chaos of Willow Creek. His cabin, though small and rustic, had a charm to it that made Ethan feel safe for the first time in days. The wooden walls were lined with shelves stacked high with books, jars of preserves, and tools that looked well used but cared for. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow over everything and chasing away the chill of the forest nights. It wasn't fancy, but it was enough, and more importantly, it felt like home. For Noah, this new arrangement was heaven. Mr. Grady had an old bassinet tucked away in a corner, which he dusted off and set up near the fire. He even dug out a soft quilt his late wife had sewn years ago, draping it over the sides to make it cozier. Every morning as sunlight streamed through the windows, Noah would wake up smiling, ready to explore his surroundings. Ethan couldn't help but laugh when the baby tried to grab at the flames dancing in the fireplace, his tiny fingers stretching toward the light. Mr. Grady proved to be surprisingly patient with both of them. He showed Ethan how to mix formula, using boiled water and powdered milk, ensuring Noah got proper nutrition. He taught him how to wash cloth diapers in a bucket by the stream, hanging them on a line outside to dry. At night, after Noah fell asleep, the two would sit by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes Mr. Grady shared stories about his younger days, how he'd met his wife, how they'd dreamed of raising a big family together, how grief had driven him into solitude. Other times he listened quietly while Ethan poured out his fears and frustrations, offering advice only when asked. "You've got guts, kid," Mr. Grady said one evening, poking at the fire with a stick. "Not many people your age would risk everything for someone else." Ethan shrugged, staring into the flames. "I didn't think I had a choice. I mean, what was I supposed to do, just let him go?" Mr. Grady nodded thoughtfully. "That's the thing about choices, they're never easy. But you made yours, and now you gotta figure out where it leads." The word stuck with Ethan long after the fire burned down to embers. For all the safety and comfort Mr. Grady provided, he knew their situation was temporary. Sooner or later, the search parties would find them, or worse, give up entirely. Either way, Ethan needed a plan. Staying hidden forever wasn't an option. Neither was handing Noah over to social services without knowing what kind of life awaited him there. One afternoon, as Ethan sat by the stream washing clothes, he spotted something glinting in the sunlight. Bending down, he picked it up, a shiny silver whistle half buried in the mud. It must have been dropped by a hiker or camper who passed through the woods. Turning it over in his hands, an idea began to form. What if we don't run anymore? He asked Mr. Grady later that evening, clutching the whistle tightly. What if we face them head on? Mr. Grady raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. I'll walk back into town holding Noah, Ethan explained, his voice gaining confidence as he spoke. If anyone tries to stop me, I'll tell them exactly why I did what I did. Maybe they'll listen. It was risky, reckless, but deep down, Ethan believed it might work. People in Willow Creek weren't heartless, they just didn't understand yet. If he could show them how much Noah meant to him, maybe they'd see things differently. Mr. Grady studied him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. All right. But remember this. You can't control how others react. All you can do is speak your truth and hope for the best. The next morning, Ethan packed a small bag with essentials, bottles, diapers, and a change of clothes for Noah. He dressed warmly, wrapping the baby snugly in the quilt, before tucking him into a carrier Mr. Grady had fashioned out of an old backpack. As they stood at the edge of the woods looking out at the quiet streets of Willow Creek, Ethan felt a strange mix of fear and resolve. This was it, the moment of truth. Walking into town felt surreal, almost dreamlike. The familiar sights and sounds hit him differently now, tinged with the weight of everything that had happened. Neighbors paused mid-conversation, their eyes widening as they recognized him. Some pointed, whispering behind cupped hands, while others simply stared in disbelief. Ethan kept his head high, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other. When he reached the center of town, he stopped in front of the diner where his mom worked. Through the window, he could see her sitting at a booth, sipping coffee with red-rimmed eyes. She looked exhausted, defeated, and for the first time Ethan realized how much she must have been hurting too. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. The bell above it jingled softly, drawing every eye in the room. Laura froze, her cup halfway to her lips as tears welled up in her eyes. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice breaking. He walked over to her, lowering the carrier so she could see Noah's face. "Mom, I'm sorry I ran away," he said, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "But I couldn't leave him, he needs us. And maybe we need him too." For a long moment no one spoke. Then slowly, Laura reached out, brushing a finger against Noah's cheek. Her expression softened, the anger and frustration melting away to reveal something deeper, something raw and vulnerable. "I was scared," she admitted finally, her voice barely audible. "Scared of failing you." Ethan shook his head. "You haven't failed us, not yet. We can still fix this together." As word spread through the diner, the crowd gathered around them, murmuring in awe. What started as whispers turned into applause, then cheers, as the townsfolk rallied behind Ethan and Noah. Even Sheriff Daniels arrived, tipping his hat respectfully before promising to help however he could. By the end of the day, Ethan's act of defiance had sparked something remarkable, a wave of compassion and support that swept through Willow Creek. Donations poured in, clothes, supplies, even offers to babysit. Strangers became allies, united by the courage of a boy who refused to give up on the smallest among them. And though challenges lay ahead, Ethan knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened next, The days that followed Ethan's bold return to Willow Creek were a whirlwind of emotions and changes. At first it felt surreal, almost like stepping into a storybook, where the townspeople who had once whispered about him now greeted him with smiles and nods. Strangers stopped him on the street to ask how Noah was doing or to offer help. Some brought baby clothes, others dropped off food, and a few even volunteered to babysit so Ethan could catch up on schoolwork he'd missed. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Laura, too, seemed transformed. The walls she'd built around herself began to crumble as she spent more time caring for Noah. At first, her actions were hesitant, almost mechanical. Changing diapers, warming bottles, rocking him to sleep. But slowly, something shifted. One evening, as Ethan watched from the doorway, he saw her laughing softly at Noah's antics, his tiny hands grabbing at her hair. Her face lit up in a way Ethan hadn't seen in years, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe things really could work out. Still, not everything was perfect. Social services arrived shortly after Ethan's return, determined to ensure Noah was being cared for properly. A kind caseworker named Ms. Thompson visited their home several times, asking questions and observing how they interacted with the baby. Ethan worried constantly during these visits, afraid someone might decide they weren't fit to keep him. But each time, Miss Thompson left with a smile, assuring them that Noah was thriving under their care. For now. "You're doing an incredible job," she told Ethan one afternoon, patting his shoulder gently. "Not many kids your age would step up the way you have." Her words meant a lot, but Ethan knew better than to let his guard down completely. He stayed vigilant, making sure every bottle was clean, every diaper changed promptly, and every nap scheduled perfectly. If anyone thought he wasn't taking this seriously, they'd be quick to take Noah away, and he couldn't bear the thought of losing him again. As weeks turned into months, life in the small house on the edge of town settled into a new rhythm. Laura officially applied to become Noah's foster mother, attending meetings and filling out paperwork late into the night. Ethan helped however he could, organizing documents and reminding her of deadlines. Together, they worked tirelessly to prove they deserved a chance to give Noah a real home. School became harder to balance, but Ethan refused to fall behind. Teachers noticed his determination, offering extra tutoring sessions when needed. Even Tommy, his best friend, pitched in by sharing notes and quizzing him during lunch breaks. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt supported, not just by his mom and Noah, but by the entire community. One crisp autumn morning, the family received news that changed everything. Laura had been approved as Noah's foster parent. The decision wasn't permanent. It would need to be reviewed periodically, but it was a start. When Ms. Thompson delivered the news, tears streamed down Laura's face as she hugged both boys tightly. Ethan grinned so wide his cheeks hurt, and Noah, sensing the excitement, clapped his chubby little hands together. That evening, they celebrated, with a simple dinner of spaghetti and garlic bread, the same meal they'd eaten the night Ethan found Noah on the porch. As they sat around the table, laughter filling the air, Ethan realized how much had changed since then. Back then, he'd been scared and alone, unsure if he could protect the baby in his arms. Now he had a team, a family, ready to fight for Noah's future alongside him, but Ethan didn't forget the lessons he'd learned along the way. Every creak of the floorboards reminded him of the nights he'd spent hiding Noah in his room. Every rustle of leaves outside brought back memories of running through the woods, desperate to keep them safe. And every giggle from Noah served as a reminder of why he'd risked everything, to give this little boy a chance at happiness. One day as he walked home from school, Ethan spotted Mr. Grady sitting on his porch, whittling a piece of wood. Stopping to say hello, Ethan thanked him once again for everything he'd done. "Don't thank me," Mr. Grady said with a chuckle. "You're the one who did all the hard work." Ethan shook his head. "I couldn't have done it without you. You gave us a second chance." Mr. Grady smiled, his eyes twinkling. "Sometimes all people need is a little push in the right direction. You had the courage to take it. You and that baby changed each other's lives." Those words stayed with Ethan long after he left, replaying in his mind as he played with Noah that evening. Courage. It was a big word for such a young boy, but it fit. He'd faced fear, doubt, and uncertainty head-on, refusing to back down, even when the odds seemed impossible. And because of that, he'd given Noah a home, and maybe, just maybe, saved himself in the process. Years later, when Noah grew older and started asking questions about his past, Ethan told him the whole story, from the moment he'd found him on the porch to the day they became a family. Sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by toys and blankets, Noah listened intently, his wide eyes shining with wonder. "So, you saved me?" he asked finally, tilting his head. Ethan laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. Yeah, buddy. I guess I did. Noah grinned, throwing his arms around Ethan in a tight hug. Then I'm gonna save you too someday. And in that moment, Ethan knew their bond was unbreakable, a testament to the power of love, resilience, and the belief that even the smallest acts of kindness can change the world.